Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you all on a Friday lunchtime. Thanks for sparing some time when you could be baking or cultivating your pumpkin patch or noodling on the guitar or whatever else people are doing. This is the 6th, I think, talk in the Design District Meet the Architect series. Disappointingly, I'm not Jemima Burrell. I'm Nick Compton, the senior editor at Wallpaper magazine, amongst other things. And those other things include being a kind of odd job man for the Greenwich Design District. So that's partly why I'm here today. And that's genuinely because ever since I first heard of the plans for the Design District, you know, this fantastic collection of 16 buildings being designed by 8 great architects, you know, a permanent, affordable place for artists and makers and creatives of all stripes to come and work. I badgered the developer Night Dragon to let me be involved in some way. So this is that's kind of part of my story. And I've been at Wallpaper for 15 years in various capacities and heard so much kind of self-congratulatory talk of London as being this kind of great creative engine and design capital, while so many creatives are being priced out and not able to afford studio space, being forced to move to Margate, which just seemed inhuman. And the Design District is obviously an effort to address that problem, but it was also, there was a larger vision there in terms of the quality of the architecture and how those buildings would work together that I hadn't really heard about anywhere, and on a scale that I hadn't heard about anywhere. And there was also a challenge in terms of how those buildings would work together and how you could offer the right support and services in those buildings and create something that didn't feel contrived or manipulative and was genuinely open and inclusive without being a kind of display case, I guess. So that's why I kind of really wanted to be involved, and they're really some of the things we'll talk about in today's Q&A. And I am genuinely thrilled today that we're going to talk to Alberto Veiga of Barcelona-based Barozzi Veiga. And the twin buildings they've drawn, kind of come up with for the Design District will be their first completed project in the UK. But because of that, they're not as well known in this country, I think, as they should be, because they're a big practice, if not in number, then in terms of you know, ambition. They design big, beautiful buildings, particularly a run of cultural institutions and schools and musicians and dancers in Switzerland and Italy and Spain, and the Mies van der Rohe award-winning Philharmonic Hall in Szczecin in Poland. And they are currently working on a master plan for the Art Institute in Chicago, which I think officially makes them big league, I think. Anyway, I think it's genuinely a real coup and a testament to the vision of Hannah Corler and Matt Dearlove at the Design District, that they are part of the Design District's mix of architects. So in terms of the format for today, I'm going to throw 8 or so questions or talking points at Alberto, and we'll run through some visuals and illustrations, and then 40 minutes in or so, we'll open things up for questions. So please throw questions at us using chat, and we will throw those at Alberto later. Questions will be far smarter, incisive than mine. And just to add finally, that Jemima, thank the Lord, will be back for the next Meet the Architects talk, which is with Salgas Carno on September the 25th. So put that in your diary. Anyway, so on with the questions. We're ready, Alberto?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
Just to say that Alberto and I are both pretty kind of novices at these kind of Zoom presentations, so be gentle. But okay, first one. And oh, Alberto, are you okay to share the screen? Did we sort that out in terms of?
Yeah, I'm gonna share it. I think it's gonna be better to have some visuals.
Yeah. Okay, so first question, which is kind of slightly left field in a way, but drawings and models are of course a core part of the architect's work and what architects do. But for some architects, that they become a kind of creative end in themselves. If you think of Zaha Hadid's drawings or Daniel Libeskind's drawings, and it's the same for you. I think they have they're more than a means to an end, and you have drawings and models in the permanent collection at the Pompidou, the Centre Pompidou. So really, can you talk about why, what drawings are to you, why they're so important to you, and how you use them, and then also how they ended up in the Pompidou Centre?
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, for an architect, the drawing, the sketches, and well, drawings generally are a way of thinking. You know? We use the drawings as a tool to let your imagination, let your thinking go away somehow. But I mean, we use them not just as well, the myth of the architect doing the sketches and creating somehow, it's something that is rooted in our minds, but we use the sketches just for document somehow works that we have done, or we use the sketches to express things that most of the times the renders or the technical drawings can't express. So that's why in this way for us are very important, because it's not just about express what was the first idea. It's about show the potential of the project, or show the potential of what you have over the table. And well, as I said, it's a way of documenting your work too. I mean, there are sketches that we have done after build the buildings, and there are sketches that we have done previously. And well, it's quite interesting to come back to them after some time, because well, privately, I mean, the sketch tells you a lot of things that you couldn't do, and a lot of things that you could do.
Can we see them? Can you talk about what they are?
Well, the first one, I mean, this is a sketch done by Fabrizio for sketching. Sketching is, I mean, the building we did in Poland, I mean, for the Philharmony.
Yeah.
The second one is Lausanne, I mean, the Fine Arts Museum. And the third one is Kur, the extension of the Fine Arts Museum in Kur in Switzerland. So, well, I think, I don't remember if these are in the Pompidou, but well, are good samples somehow of the way we use the sketches and the way we try to document the works.
And these are really the first ideas that once you visited the site, these are the first initial ideas you're putting together?
No, I think that never happens. I mean, the first time you visit a site, you don't know what to do. I mean, perhaps there are people who are able to perceive everything from the first visit, but I think in our case, that's not the truth. We need a lot of time. You need to sketch a lot. You need a lot of time just to realize what to do. And so I think that was I was talking about the myth of an architect sketching. I think that's not that's not so common, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. And how did they end up in the Pompidou? They who saw them, and how did they get there?
Well, the drawings of the models are there, are at the Pompidou. I don't know exactly. I mean, I hope sometimes they are going to exhibit them, but I'm not sure about when. I think well, their intention is it's great. I mean, it's just to document the work of several architects, well, a lot of architects really, but to document the work they did in a certain time somehow, and then to use them as a way to express what was happening on that time. in terms of architecture in around Europe mainly. And I think their intention. It's really interesting. I mean, it's very ambitious too, and that's why I think it's a good way for us to at least to document the work we did.
Great. And moving on, I mean, another element of your built work, rather than sketches, is the you know, you're not afraid to use texture and ornament on exteriors, which obviously has been sort of an architectural no-no for the last century, really, apart from a bit of a postmodern blip. I guess that's changed in the last decade a little bit. So yeah, talk a little bit about how you use texture and ornament on the exterior, and kind of what you think it's there to do.
Yeah, well, when I read your question and I read the word ornament, I was a bit afraid because, well, you know, ornament was a word that wasn't used in architecture 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It was always a kind of a forbidden word somehow. Well, I think every building is different. Every building needs. We always try to find a specific answer for every site. And in that sense, we always try to get a different. We always try to get the right character or the right atmosphere at the places where we work. It's not the same, for example, the staging, the picture that you're looking at now, or core. I mean, we always try to get the right character of the building. Sometimes it's just through the materials, the materiality of the building. Can be stone, can be aluminum, like in staging, can be prefab concrete, like in core. But it's always a need that we feel when we approach to the sites. That's why in our case, every building is different. Every building tries to express something different through the texture, through the materials, or through the ornament. For example, perhaps the best sample for that word, for the word ornament, is core. I mean, we thought that we needed to express something beyond the fact just doing a concrete building, and then to understand the ornament as in the as in the pre-existence of the museum in Villa Planta. We thought that would be a good answer somehow, because somehow the buildings, our buildings, what the buildings tries is to seduce people, visitors. I mean, we need to convince them to enter on the buildings and transmit something at the end. And if you want to transmit the idea of material, the idea of texture, and ornament, why not? It's something that it's fundamental from our point of view. So it's something that depends on every building, of the character of the site. And as I said before, because we always try to find specific answers for the places where we work. And that's why take us a lot of time and take us a lot of efforts to decide which material, which texture, which element that we can use as ornament, for example. And it's not, and that's why it's not so evident at the beginning when you first approach to a site.
And so looking at that image, so this back one, the openings on the high level. I mean, do they, you know, the pyramid inverted? No, the pyramids at the top. Are they serve a function? Are they functional in any way? Are they purely ornamental?
No, there's always. I mean, you can't use just. I mean, behind the word ornament, you always need to have a functional answer for everything. Yeah. I mean, if not, just would be a gesture, and we try to avoid gestures. I mean, now we are looking at the Tanzhaus Zurich. I mean, which is characterized by these triangular windows somehow. And behind of this decision, it's the fact that we were working in a kind of an industrial place where the idea of the repetition of elements, the repetition of a strict geometry was natural. And then there are a lot of technical reasons here. We need to fulfill, I mean, the building is facing south, so we had to have a balance of 50% of blind surfaces, 50% of openings. So this geometry allowed us to get that kind of restriction. And then there are a lot of, I mean, internal reasons and technical reasons. I mean, the way the structure works with the concrete walls, the way even the building is built, made sense with the fact of the repetition of a triangle. Of course, well, we always have sometimes dozens of arguments for every decisions we do, but it's true that most of the times there is a desire or there is just a justification that is that we thought that was the right decision and we like it.
Yeah.
but that's not enough. You need to have more arguments. You need to justify your work from different point of views. And that makes the decision more consistent always. And that's why we try to avoid gestures. We use texture and ornament always with something behind them. I mean, with something that can explain the building from different point of views.
Yeah. Moving to the design district specifically, and then I mean we've talked about in the past the. Sorry, am I missing out some of your?
No, well, this was the last sample of texture and materials. This is Lausanne. This is the Fine Arts Museum in Lausanne.
It's beautiful.
And yeah, it's completely different than the others pictures, but well, it has the same aim and the same idea, how to get the atmosphere that we thought was right, and how to express the character of the building from our point of view in the right way.
Great, it's such a beautiful building, that building. Moving to the design district specifically, you know, and we've talked, or Jemima and other architects have talked in the previous talks about how the design district is you know, this compact, sort of higgledy-piggledy collection of buildings tight on each other, kind of almost medieval, you know, where you're kind of ducking and diving, and to create a kind of energy with this very compact collection of buildings. Was that something you used to doing? And the other thing, you know, obviously a feature of the design district in its planning was that there were 8 architects who weren't aware of what the other architects were doing, and you know, most architects are used to responding to a context, obviously. So how, in terms of the tightness of the plot on that particular kind of very tight medieval kind of street structure, and then also just not being able to respond to other buildings because you hadn't seen the plans. How did that affect the designs of the design district?
Well, that affects the design a lot, I would say. The context, the fact of a context, that's the most basic for an architect, not to react within the context in the right way. I mean, well, for example, this is a picture of staging, which is probably a good sample to talk about how the context, even not the physical context, can somehow shape the way you work somehow. I mean, in London, in the design district, we didn't have neighbors somehow. We didn't know them. We just knew somehow the main restraints and the main guidelines given by the master plan, but we didn't have, for example, this kind of help. This is our neighboring staging, and of course, when you start to work, and when we start to design, we always have the context we need to have a context in mind, because that helps you to step by step discover how the building is going to be. Of course, I mean, it's not, as I said, it's not a physical fact. I mean, because to react within the context in a good way, that's something that all the architects should do. I mean, in our way, we try to take that fact beyond somehow. We try to discover how is the atmosphere on that side. How should be the atmosphere, or how should be, as I said before, the attitude or the character of our building. In staging, the physical context helped us a lot. I mean, this kind of vertical and massive architectures, which are characteristic from West Pomerania, and it's somehow reflected in the way we finally did the building. But the context has another quality that for us it's very, perhaps it's the most important. It's the concept. The context helps you to discover the unexpected. I mean, when we approach to a site, we never know exactly how the building is going to be. I mean, we didn't have in mind at the beginning that the building and staging would be like the final proposal, like the view you're looking at here. How this affect to the design district? I mean, we didn't know the context because the context was an ensemble of buildings done at the same time by 8 different architects. What we try to do is to envision somehow an atmosphere, having in mind what was London for us, having in mind what was the idea of a creative space in London somehow. And so we didn't work with the physical fact of having a neighbor, but well, we did the effort of thinking about that place with some abstraction, but having in the idea that, well, we have the main guidelines, we have the restriction of the master plan. Let's just imagine how this space is going to work, and let's just imagine how the buildings are going to be in the middle of the master plan. So it's true that when you don't have, in our case, when you don't have physical context, makes your job much more difficult. But well, I mean, let's hope that we can success even working from some kind of abstraction, I think.
Yeah, but it's not liberating in any sense. I mean, it doesn't.
No, not at all. And well, even in the design district, it was not liberating. And then there was the pressure of somehow competing with another 7 firms, you know, because well, architects, we are always competing. So we knew that at the same time, a lot of people was working on with the same issues and working with the same restrictions, but we didn't know their answers. So it was stressful too. So it was not. I mean, freedom doesn't mean to have more chances for doing anything.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was more stressful because you knew that all the guys were working at the same time with the same constraints and with the same problems in mind. So
all stress, no liberation.
Yeah, no liberation, no.
Excellent. For the next question, I need to badger people again to send in their questions via chat. Yes, so please do that. And then, so this is obviously, we're now where your buildings are within the, and obviously you knew where your buildings were going to be within that plan.
Yeah.
So you had some sense of that. I mean, the next one is just kind of the larger context. I mean, the one thing I always like about the Greenwich Peninsula whenever I go is just that sense that it's pretty, unusually for London, because it's a peninsula, obviously it's pretty exposed, and there's weather and there's light in ways that in some ways you don't. And I mean, it's sort of dense, but limitedly dense so far. But yeah, that you feel an unusual kind of exposure, I think, compared to other parts of London. Was that, did that figure in the designs? Because I think you said not really. I mean, and also that way that the buildings almost, the design just almost feels like a bit of a protective huddle. Mm-hmm. And whether you thought about that as well.
Yeah. Well, for example, the fact of the river, for example, I mean, or the idea that we are working in a peninsula, I think didn't affect or didn't influence somehow the design. But what influences the design always is the kind of memory that you have from the very beginning of the site. And of course, the mood, the character of the design district, this area, because of the river and because of the fact that probably of the peninsula, the idea of that being in the middle of water. Somehow this affects and influences the work you do, because, yeah, I'm repeating myself, but this idea of try to discover the right character for the buildings and try to get the right atmosphere that you want to propose, it's because, yeah, some kind of feeling you have when you go to the site since the very, from the first time. So in that sense, the river has some influence on the designs or the idea of the peninsula, but it's not literally an influence somehow. The buildings are what they are because of this ensemble. Yeah, you call it huddle. It's a right word. I mean, because of the density of the site, because of how the buildings are composed in this ensemble. That's the main reason for the main guidelines of the geometry. That's the reason for the way we were working with the proportions of the buildings. Because in this case, we were trying to use these restrictions are a benefit in terms of shaping the building in a different way somehow. Trying to get the right proportion, trying to get the right idea of verticality somehow. And that's because of the master plan and the idea of an ensemble of buildings, but not because of our physical facts that we had on site. I mean, it's not because of the river, for sure. It's not because of a wider somehow vision of the site.
And the one feature of the site, I mean, the one thing that these buildings, I mean, they're designed as, artist ateliers. The light is crucial, so you're using the light that's available, and there's a lot of light available, but also playing with the light on the facades, because both the buildings have polished aluminium facades, Alberto, or just one? Both?
Yeah, both of them, black and silver, but both are aluminium. Yeah.
And they so in terms of the design, did the orientation of the buildings, you have to really think about that as well. I'm just getting up to the, how the buildings are using the light and playing with the light, and then how their position, I guess, within the district has affected all that.
Well, as you said, these are artists' ateliers, and our aim, that is an aim that we had in some of the works we did lately. It was just to compose a good background for them, for the artists, for the designers, for the people who is going to use these spaces. So we try to play with the basics or with the fundamentals of our profession. I mean, the right scale, the right dimensions for a room, and the right lighting. How to play with natural light, how to introduce natural light in the right way into a space. That's architecture. And modestly, what we try to do is try to get the better conditions for every workshop in our buildings. I mean, so interiorly we were working with models, renders, with the textures and the materials in order to get a right answer for this question. And outside, the buildings are different somehow. Both of them are different because they try to react to different conditions into the master plan. I mean, the silver one reacts at the entrance of the master plan in front of the main square, tries to somehow disappear a little bit because we try to be a member of the ensemble, and we don't try to be probably to get the entire attention of everybody when you enter into the neighborhood. So plays a little bit more with light. The second one is black because it appears at the end of the master plan. It's like it's like a background for the entire composition of the master plan, I think, when you enter the design district. So both are playing with with a different idea of how to reflect the surroundings or how to forget the surroundings somehow. and both are playing with the idea of the windows as the main element in an industrial building, as the main element in order to get a good atmosphere for the workshops. So it's true that we put more attention, or a lot of attention, with the fact of the natural light in these buildings, because, as I said, we were working with the basics, with the fundamentals of our profession. And that's why I think it's crucial to succeed with this if you want to have a good workshop.
Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, you've created spaces, you know, performance spaces, display spaces, fantastic gallery spaces, fantastic auditorium spaces, but also schools, dance schools, music schools. So people work, places where people kind of practice their craft and hone their craft. And so it was just interesting how you thought the different requirements of those kind of spaces in terms of, you know, displaying work, performing work, and creating work, or how different they were in terms of what the needs were.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I told you before. I mean, it's a very good question because I think when you do a museum, or when you do I don't know, a philharmony, for example, when we did Poland or Lausanne, I mean, somehow you know how the building is going to be for the during the next 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, when you build it, you know, somehow, well, with the slight changes, somehow how it's going to be that building for the next 10, 15 years. But when you do a school, in this case, when you do a workshop for an artist, or when you do a dance school, or when you do a music school, I mean, the building doesn't belong to you anymore. I mean, the building is going to change completely. I'm conscious that the tenant in London is going to change completely, probably the workshops we are planning. And we are conscious that when the dancers or the musicians are into the rooms that we have planned, they change it completely. And telling you the truth, sometimes at the beginning for me it was hard to assume it, because you always think about the building like a perfect ensemble somehow. You don't want to touch anything, and you don't want anybody touching anything. But I think that I mean, you need to assume that, as I said, it doesn't belong to you, the building. You need to compose you need to plan a building that is able to host whatever it can happen. And the users, they just need to transform it and use it however they want somehow.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to understand that your building doesn't belong to you. And that the building has a second life or a third life without you. And if I reflect about this, most of the buildings I like are buildings that has changed completely during the last decades somehow. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah, yeah.
If you survive, if the building survives, that means, and if the building survives with radical changes somehow, that means that was a good building. So I hope in 10 years, 15 years, perhaps somebody, well, probably in 5 years, somebody's going to change completely the interiors of the design district buildings. I'm okay with that. If they change it, it's because I like it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating in that sense of, because in terms of the big cultural institutions of design, what they do, I think, really successfully is they play with ideas of, you know, they're big and they're, you know, big imposing spaces, and they play with ideas of monumentality and timelessness and foreverness, without ever feeling kind of heavy or bombastic.
Yeah.
And they don't feel kind of heavy or kind of, you know, didactic in any way. And then the design district buildings, you know, which may be there for centuries, who knows, but they feel much lighter and much more utilitarian, and much, you know, they're doing a different job in some ways. You know, how do you think about that? I'm just fascinated about the idea of the, you know, architecture that feels a bit more immediate, and architecture that maybe the design district does, an architecture that kind of plays with that idea of being around for a long time and changing over time.
Yeah. Well, it's true that yeah, I mean, our buildings in London are lighter somehow than other buildings we did, or not so. Probably they doesn't have the presence that other buildings that we did, but I think, I mean, the aim that we had when we designed them was exactly the same that when we did, for example, Zurich, which is the building that you're looking at here, or Lausanne. I mean, the presence is not the same. I mean, the idea of how to generate some attraction around them, because those were public buildings, and probably the quality in the design district is just to belong to an ensemble. For us was more important, that idea, how to belong to this ensemble, than how to impose somehow a kind of selfish vision of our building somehow. And so it's true that every site it's different. I mean, the buildings are lighter, but somehow they try to deal between what was an industrial building before, what's an industrial building or a creative building nowadays. Our interpretation of what's that how is that kind of buildings, how are that kind of buildings, and so the attitude in terms of how to design it was the same than when we did Lausanne or when we did Zurich. You know, when you look at Lausanne, for example, it's not the same scale, it's not the same. Lausanne has a totally different impact into the city, of course. But somehow it's a building that, as the design district buildings, just try to explore the potential of being a good background for the site, trying to compose something that plays with simple rules, and trying to be expressive. It's the same aim that we had in London, being expressive with simple rules, simple ideas of what is a space for a designer, what is a space for, in our case, for a small school for Rabbitsburn. So I think we always have the same kind of approach to the buildings. But it's true that sometimes the answer is like in Lausanne or like in Zurich, it's more, I mean, the strength is different, and the way you expose the building, it's different. I think in London, it's more about how to be a good family member somehow of the ensemble, of the design district, and how to create a good, from our point of view, a good building.
That's interesting. Just kind of thinking back to that earlier conversation about being, you know, not seeing the other buildings. Did you feel a sense that you had to kind of, the building couldn't be too strong, it couldn't be too kind of, there's too much of a statement, because you didn't know what else was going on, and there was that kind of restraint going on as well. It couldn't be too expressive.
Yeah, I think it's, well, that every architect has a different reaction, and every architect has a different opinion, probably. And that's why our profession is so interesting and so nice, really. But we thought that in this case, it was where it have a kind of try to disappear a bit somehow. I like the design district approach because of this idea of how to build together an ensemble of buildings, how to build a neighborhood. And probably our attitude was an attitude where we try to be, a good background for the daily life of this neighborhood, which we had in mind could be really something that reflects about London, about creativity, and, well, those ideas that we had in mind thinking about London. From that perspective, the buildings are more discreet somehow, or try to be more discreet than others, and try to be, try to disappear a little bit.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the buildings are shy, or doesn't mean that the buildings are less ambitious than other buildings that we have done. I mean, it's just a question of how to transmit that feeling.
Excellent. Alberto, so the questions have been pouring in, I think. So, and I'm going to hand over to Alex now, I think, who can throw some questions from the audience at you.
Yes, we've got loads as well, actually. What's a good? Here's a good one from Lawrence. He says, "How often do you return to your buildings after they've opened to see how they're being used and how close the fit is with your original intentions?"
Yeah. Well, we try to come back often. I mean, often means that probably. I mean, if I think about staging, Lausanne or Cour, we have been there more than 6-10 times in every building since we finished them. I mean, because I think it's quite important to see how the building works, and it's important to learn about what you do, and it's important to feel if what you had in mind really happens or not. And it's important to see how the user and how the visitors are transforming what you planned somehow. And it's important to see your mistakes because we do a lot of mistakes. And so it's important to come back. I mean, you can be, we are very critics with the work we do. And if you don't come back, you can't be critic. And that's why I think for everybody, it's for all the architects should be a must to come back very often. And then, you know, it's something important for us because I think it's very important to see how the building is aging somehow and how the building, from a technical point of view, but from a design point of view too. And you just can see that if you visit the site and if you move through the building and if you ask people about them. So yeah, we try to do it. The fact is that we don't have any work in Barcelona, for example, so it's a pity because I would learn a lot about it. But well, I mean, we try to come back as much as possible to the works we did abroad.
Just on that subject, Lawrence mentioned original intentions. The design district is open to everyone from right the way across the creative industries. In some of the images that you showed, there were dancers. Did you have a specific idea in mind of the sorts of users that would be operating in your spaces?
No, well, we didn't. I mean, when we designed the buildings, we thought that the buildings would be for, yeah, as you said, designers, artists, workshops mainly. But we didn't know exactly who would be the tenant or who would be the user. So from that point of view, it was very abstract. I mean, of course, I mean, there were some guidelines. There was a brief that we need to follow, but we didn't know the users. So somehow that's something that it's not so useful. But well, I mean, I think, telling you the truth, I mean, what we did was to design this workshop as if this was our workshop. We designed it for us somehow. And I think it would be a very good workshop for us. Every floor could be a very good workshop for us. And this is the approach we had, I think.
Okay. I've got a technical question from Nicola, who asks, did you face any problems working with aluminium when considering passive solar and cooling systems, and how did you test it?
Well, it's a tricky question somehow. I mean, we didn't have problems thinking about the polished aluminium from an energy point of view, or from a somehow passive approach to the buildings that we did. I think the buildings are working properly. I mean, these are not passive buildings. So but the balance of energy from an energy perspective, I think it's quite good. The polished aluminum is not the most reflective polished aluminum we could get. I mean, we tried to control somehow the problems that this could that this idea could have somehow. So we try to control the brightness somehow of the building too, because well, London, the weather in London changes radically from summer to winter. So we were afraid about what would happen during the summer. And in that sense, the way we architects have to test things is just to do small mock-ups and see how the mock-ups are reacting and seeing how the material reacts with different lights. I mean, we didn't do it from a scientific point of view somehow, but we tested as much as we could.
Peter has asked, how do you find your level of compromise between the initial design to the actual execution of a project? And I imagine this changes from project to project. So maybe in the case of the design district.
Well, the main way to do it is to visit the site as much as possible, which is something that is not happening currently in London because of the pandemic. Somehow we can't fly as much as we should somehow. In fact, we can't fly now to London. The tool you have is visiting the site and trying to control as much as possible the execution with the drawings you did. I always say is that the most you draw, the most you control the works on site, the most you understand what you want to do, the most you can control it on site. But then it's true that the fact of working abroad during so many years has obliged us to understand an architecture. And a good building is not just about the execution of the building. I mean, the building can be a good building even if the details are not exactly what you was expecting, or even if the materials are not exactly what you was proposing since the beginning. Most of the buildings that we have done have been evolving during the works on site, have been changing a lot during the works on site because we were not there every day. And that's why I think the approach we had when we designed something or when we propose something, it's try to get a concept strong enough to afford these kind of changes during the works on site. But then what we do is, as most of the architects, is to visit the site as much as we can, try to deal with as many people as possible, and try to convince as many people as possible with what we do, which is not easy most of the times.
Okay. Another question from Lawrence, and he's saying not many architects admit to mistakes. Are there any mistakes you've spotted ahead of the DD building's opening? And I asked that with a kind of a bit of trepidation.
Well, I'm not sure about the mistakes we did in London. For sure, we did mistakes, but we need to finish the buildings firstly. We need to visit them, and we need to double check if what we have in mind already are going to be really mistakes. But I'm pretty sure that we did mistakes with the buildings. Nobody does anything perfect, and that's impossible. And I'm pretty sure that, yeah, the day of the opening, you don't see anything. The day of the opening, it's perfect. So the day of the opening is the best day, probably. But the day after, it's the day where you really realize, or you really start to realize about the mistakes you did. And this happened in all the buildings we did. Really. So that's why I know that this is going to happen in London too. In all the buildings we did mistakes. But well, that's something that it's natural somehow.
What was your reaction when you first saw the other 14 buildings? And did you feel that you had won?
Can you repeat me the last question?
Okay, so it's the two-parter, and the
No,
question
the second part. Just the second part.
The second part is: do you feel that your buildings are the best, I suppose, of the collection that are?
Well, well, no, I have an answer for the second part of the question. I mean, I don't know if our buildings are going to be the best. I think what we try, I mean, but this is something that I heard the sentence is not my sentence, but I heard somebody saying, describing his work, I mean, as he always tried to do his best, even if he was not best. And we try to do our best. I'm sure that we try it. I don't know if, I mean, probably our buildings are going to be the best for somebody, and that's enough. You can't convince 100% of people, and my opinion is as important as the opinion of the rest of the people who is going to visit the buildings or who is going to occupy the building. I would be happy just if somebody, I mean, of course, as many people as possible, but well, at least if somebody feels that the buildings are good buildings and are working properly. Of course, if you can success with everybody. About what I felt when I saw the entire bunch of buildings somehow, well, I thought it was weird. I mean, somehow because all of them are totally different and the attitudes of all the architects were different. And I don't know, I mean, if you ask me directly if this is going to be a success or a fail, I think the atmosphere that the design district is going to provoke is going to be a success. Specifically about the architecture itself, about every building, I'm not sure about that. Let's see. But I think the atmosphere, the mood somehow in between Greenwich, I think is going to work, and it's going to be a very good neighborhood, in a small, very good neighborhood. So I think in that sense, it's going to be very, very interesting. About the architecture, well, I don't know exactly how everything is going to mix, and I think the density is right. I think the approach of the master plan, I think it's right, and from that point of view, it should work. So, but well, let's see.
Watch this space. And to your knowledge, is there anything else like this anywhere else in the world? Because I've been trying to think of other examples of collections of buildings that have been sort of designed in this way.
I think not in this. I mean, it's not so unusual to invite several architects working together in a kind of common project, doing housing or doing whatever, but not with this density and not with this intensity, I would say. I mean, it's not usual to work with another 8 firms at the same time in such a small place somehow, dealing almost physically with the rest of the building. So it's a different approach. And I think it's because of the scale of the buildings, because of the nature of the master plan. I think it's quite unique, the design district approach, and I think it's an experiment somehow, and I think it's quite interesting. I mean, it was very stressful, telling you the truth, as an architect, but it was a nice experiment.
Good. Okay, and last question, and we asked this to everybody that's taken part in this series so far. What is your favorite building that you didn't design?
The favorite building we didn't design? My favorite building we didn't design. Probably, well, well, a public building, because I mean, this is what we did in the last years. I mean, what we try to do through competitions most of the times. I like this kind of public spaces, like train stations, for example, or this kind of spaces where probably the building is not the main actor. I can give you a sample of it probably because, well, I put in more time, I think. But yeah, a train station or a good public space, a good square composed by buildings, but it's probably my preferred site that I didn't design somehow. It's something that is linked with the way I understand architecture. I think I prefer to compose a good public space somehow than to be a main role into the site. And well, it's yeah, being concise, I can give you a sample, a name for a building, but well, that kind of building is the buildings that I like.
I think the end actually.
So anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks again. And Jemima will be back next time to talk to Salgus Carno. So join us then.
Thank you. Thank you all.